Welcome to the Renegade podcast with me, George Papp, seeking to empower you with practical strategies and information to exit the matrix by speaking to experts and individuals making a difference. Check out the Renegade Lifestyle website, renegadelifestyle.net. Link will be in the description. Get access to our monthly newsletter, the Renegade Insider, which is packed with detailed content from the team and special guests. We help you exit the banking system, create location independent income, improve your health protocols, and much, much more. Our aim is ultimately to help you move away from a system that doesn't serve you, rise above the matrix, and become ungovernable. Today, we are joined by Doug, who is one of the hosts of Monero Talk, a great show all about privacy, crypto, specifically Monero. We will delve into how Monero can be a tool for economic freedom. Welcome to the show. How's it going, Doug?
Thanks for having me, George. Thanks for waking me up so early. Get me started.
Yeah, 7 a.m. over there. I do apologize. I think you're so busy right now with what's going to happen soon with the Monerotopia event that like you had to fit it in at like the first point of call at
Yeah,
7 a.m.
we had two shows last night, and then we had one this morning, and then we have another one tonight. I feel like I'm running for Congress again over here. It's just a different type of campaign.
Yeah, certainly a different type of campaign. Yeah, we're going for the freedom aspect here with Monero. It's something that we love here at Renegade Lifestyle in regards to like a freedom advocating tool that we can potentially use. We'll delve into, I guess, what it is exactly. I'm sure many of the viewers and listeners know what Monero is, but we'll delve into it a little bit more and what you guys are doing as well. First off, I mean, how did you first get into Monero and the space itself, and your kind of background story to that?
Yeah, so I got into crypto. Actually, I'll give my annoying story. I tell it so much, but probably your audience hasn't heard it. So I kind of officially got into crypto Christmas Eve 2013. And the reason I remember is because I bought $50 worth of Dogecoin on Christmas Eve. I had heard about Bitcoin maybe since like 2011. When I say heard about, like saw it in the headlines, or I was into the tech scene a little bit, so I saw the, but I always ignored it because I just assumed it was another attempt at digital cash that was just centralized, right, without stopping to study it and understand what it really was. And then so I saw this thing Dogecoin. I was like, all right, so Bitcoin went from 0 to 1,000 or whatever it was. I'm like, let me turn $50 into $5,000 just for fun. And so I went on the on Reddit. It actually led me to Reddit for the first time. And went to the Dogecoin forum and found somebody who was willing to sell me $50 worth of Doge via PayPal. I sent them $50. Sent me the Doge. I created an online wallet, like rule number one, especially back in those days. Like you don't store your crypto on a web wallet. And I woke up the next day to check my Doge and signed in, and all my Doge was gone. In fact, everybody's Doge, everybody who had saved Doge on this web wallet, everybody got hacked. It was the Christmas hack of Doge, and like it was like millions and millions of Doge. I was like, "What is this?" I'm like, and I'm on Reddit now. Now I'm like drawn in. I'm like, "What is going on here?" I'm like, "I just bought $50 worth. It's all got." I'm like, "This is the worst invention ever." I'm like, "Why would I want to own something like this where hackers could just easily steal it?" That led me down the rabbit hole to start reading about it. Well, if you hold your own keys, hold your own keys. What do you mean hold your own keys? The private key and the public key. And so that got me studying crypto. I read the Bitcoin white paper, and once like anybody else that's kind of gone down this rabbit hole, there was the eureka moment. Like this thing is unstoppable. This is amazing. This is true digital cash that isn't controlled by any state or corporation. And so I was gaga for Bitcoin. And so I kind of tried to, wasn't very wealthy personally, so I didn't have much to put into it, but I was putting in a lot of time, and any opportunity I had to buy, I bought all the way, would buy my Bitcoin as it went down, because that was 2014, right? That was the one of the peaks, and it kind of went all the way down. Mount Gox happened. When Mount Gox happened, I was like, yes, it's gonna crash more. So I continued to buy, but it was when I really started to use it that my eyes to Bitcoin's flaws opened. I'd start sending it to my friends, testing it, using it on the internet a little bit to buy some things. Granted, I was trying to save as much as I could, but I was also, excited about it. And every time I sent the transaction, I'd be like, go look it up on the blockchain to make sure it went through. Right. I wasn't very comfortable with it. I was, oh, this is cool. I could see, oh, here, my Bitcoin went from this address to my friend's address. My friend would look on the blockchain as well. Oh yeah, I got it. I could see actually I could see you got, oh wow, look, you got a few Bitcoin. And I'm like, huh. I'm like, that's weird. When I when I pay my friend with cash, he doesn't know how much money I have in my bank account. When I go use my Visa card at the cash register, the person at the cash register isn't like, "Oh, look how much money you have in your bank." Like that's just strange. It's not really very cash like. So that led me down the road of what who is solving this problem. And so Monero was coming about at that time. I think the first person I really heard talking about was Peter Todd, who actually he just messaged me this morning because he might be coming to Monerotopia. He's just telling us right now today. So excited about that. He might be a guest at Monerotopia in Mexico City. Um, and that led me down the Monero rabbit hole. I was a BTC maxi, so it was hard for me to look away. So I went through that transition of being a BTC maxi and converting over. Right, like I felt what it feels like to go through that. Because I understand that, right? You're very passionate. You hold your bags. It becomes religious, right? Dangerously religious. But I went through that process, and for me, it was kind of a conscious moment where I said to myself, why am I really at the core? What got me so excited about this tech to begin with? Well, like what was I so passionate about? And believe it or not, it wasn't because hey, I think I could become a millionaire overnight. Although that did excite me, right? I could turn my fiat into. But really, really excited me is here's this tech that's going to completely disrupt the current financial system and disrupt the state as we know it. Because if we have a way for people to transact digitally, privately, where nobody can see or surveil anyone's transactions, that's going to be quite disruptive. And in my mind, Bitcoin, while it took money out of the hands of the state, at the end of the day, the state would have the ability to completely surveil the ledger. And I was just kind of doing the game theory in my head as to where that's going to take us, right? So, all right, so if I keep my Bitcoin, maybe I'll have, $3 million at the end of the day worth of Bitcoin. But if I keep my Monero, all right, maybe I'll only have 500,000 or $1 million. I'm like, but it's going to be completely untraceable digital gold, and that's what really excited me, and that's when I made a conscious decision to just completely move over, and also to fight for Monero because I saw how Bitcoin was taking all the oxygen out of the room, and I wanted to make sure people were becoming aware of what I saw as the true crypto. And these things really, at the end of the day, they could be great. They could do everything technologically amazing. But if they don't gain that network effect to a large enough degree, they just become irrelevant. And so that's how I became a Monero maxi, I think.
Monero Maxi, yeah. I think Bitcoin solves issues like taking the central bank out. Basically, like you can't print that to infinity in hyperinflation, which
Exactly.
and we're seeing the effects of that right now. I mean, the banking system is basically collapsing. I think this is the beginning of the end. And I think with Bitcoin, it gives that option to have, I guess, a digital gold. But the only issue with it is that it is traceable, and it then kind of in a sense moves people into CBDCs because it's quite similar. The only difference is it's programmable the CBDC sense will be programmable to you won't be able to spend in a certain zone, or you've gone past your maximum amount of chocolate bars you can buy in a month or something, just something stupid like that.
Yeah, and I mean, here's where I get a little. Maybe I sound even more maxi than you think in terms of Monero. I fear that something like Bitcoin might effectively be the CBDC, right? Like, in all these dystopia novels, right? It's not so much that dystopia is forced upon the people, but it's that the people rush into it thinking it's the solution. And so here we have, big bad CBDC that everybody's scared of, and then we have this island, the Ark, Noah's Ark of Bitcoin that everybody's rushing into. That's going to save us all. And at the end of the day, we're all onboarding potentially onto a completely traceable ledger. And while the government may not be able to technically program Bitcoin, they could effectively perhaps program it, right? With enough influence,
Yeah.
So when you go to use your Bitcoin somewhere, oh, sorry, we can't accept those Bitcoin because according to the government, you already have your quota of meat. All right, so that's the fear with the CBDC. But how is that fear not there with Bitcoin? If you could perfectly trace how everybody's using it, you could do the same exact thing as with the CBDC in terms of keeping track of how everybody's using their money. You may not be able to press a button where it says they can't spend, but if you can control everybody that's receiving it, and they all have to follow these regulations, and it's pretty much instant when somebody goes to Starbucks and Starbucks is getting an alert that says don't accept the payment, they're not going to accept the payment. And so that's like my deepest fear with Bitcoin is that its traceability effectively can allow governments to co-opt it. And the privacy of Monero, I hate calling Monero a privacy coin. I think it's, I guess, necessary for nomenclature, just for people to understand what differentiates the two. But really, I see privacy as being completely essential to what crypto needs to be. Satoshi said it was synonymous, and maybe at the time he thought that was good enough, and maybe that's what it needed to be initially for people to have trust in it, right? When I was, like I said, when I was first using Bitcoin, what was I doing? I was going to look at did my transaction go through? Otherwise, it would just be complete magic, right? I was like, how would I be able to trust this thing that just got invented overnight, where people are telling me there's no double spends? Here I'm looking at a ledger. It's great. So it's great for that, for teaching people the basic concept. But in reality, it leads to a lot of problems. And I don't think privacy is just kind of a nice to have feature. I think it's essential to crypto being incorruptible. And so, because of that transparent ledger, it creates an attack surface that governments and corporations can use to basically wield power over the chain. And as we know, governments have infinite resources, they have the money printer, they have fiat. So it's you versus their infinite resources fighting over who has more influence over this tech. And because they have those infinite resources, it gives them an advantage
Yeah.
to essentially control people that are using this completely traceable ledger. And it goes beyond just the traceability of it. There's other aspects to Bitcoin that I think weaken it and make it susceptible to being co-opted. The other thing is the way it's mined. Bitcoin is ASIC mined. Essentially all the mining is done by a handful of corporations that control the mining. They're the ones with access to the ASICs, and just because of economies of scale, they're the ones that do all the mining. And what is happening, and what's going to happen to a worse degree, is governments are going to do what they do best. They're going to go knock on the door of up and coming and successful corporations to demand their piece of flesh, right? Their pound of flesh. To tell them, their governments are a gang, right? They're a gang. They're the biggest gang in town. Yeah, they're the biggest gang in your area. So when they see a nice up and coming successful business, they go and they want their share. And now, so with Bitcoin miners, they can do that. They're going to go, they're already doing it. They're knocking on their door and they're saying, hey, you're using too much electricity. You need to follow this regulation. Or, hey, we have this list of, Bitcoin addresses that we need that are flagged. These are non-compliant addresses. It'd be illegal for anybody to send Bitcoin to this address. Make sure you don't process a transaction that's going to this address. And so they can knock on the door of these corporations, and what are the corporations going to do? They're going to listen. They're going to abide, because at the end of the day, they're going to end up being in cahoots with the governments, because it's just going to work out for them, right, to their advantage. They're already big. They want to maintain their advantage. So they'll go into cahoots with the government. It will shut out all the little guys that want to enter the system. There'll be regulatory capture, and that's just another example of governments getting their hands into Bitcoin. And granted, yes, they may not be able to write, from their, evil lair right away to, like, enter a piece of code that's going to change Bitcoin, or make it programmable, but they could effectively control it, giving its weaknesses.
Yeah, I've always, well, to be honest, I was a bit of a maxi also with Bitcoin a couple of years ago, but I have come to a conclusion where it's potentially a libertarian honeypot of kind of like you capture a certain amount of people who are interested in freedom, or at least to move away from the banking system, to kind of believe in this. But at the end of the day, that's also pushing the agenda of CBDCs because it's so similar in what they want to, in terms of the fact that it's traceable. And you're seeing obviously places like El Salvador, in a sense, it's a double edged sword, because if you have a country like El Salvador accept it as currency, it could lead the way to like other currencies like Monero being brought in, or used at least, because people get familiar with Bitcoin, and then maybe that's a sort of keeping that door open for something like Monero to be used by some people. But again, I actually thought that the CBD for countries like who are smaller, like El Salvador and others that can't maybe produce their own CBDCs, they'll be using Bitcoin. And I've kind of come to that kind of conclusion. I'm not too sure if that's something that you align with or have thought about.
Well, I don't like what's going on down there, in that it's own form of fiat, in that it was essentially mandated by the government. It
Yeah, as
wasn't that
well, mandated. Yeah,
it arose organically and the people chose it. But I do like that it's helping usher in crypto,
yeah,
right? So it's kind of a
double-edged
double
sword. Yeah,
edged there. But that's kind of the third issue I see with Bitcoin. So the traceability, right? Governments have the ability to track and trace and completely surveil the train, and work in with these tracing companies, create regulations that mandate that essentially things be traced, fund these tracing companies with millions of dollars, give them the contracts to do it, and just create that regulatory loop where these tracing companies get more powerful. They're essentially become an arm of the government. Major problem. Second one is the ASIC miners, and the tendency for that to become centralized, and these companies enter into this loop with governments, right? The third thing I see is the fact that Bitcoin really isn't scalable on the base layer. And so there's this need for a layer two, which is basically an extrapolation of layer one, and at the end of the day really isn't truly as decentralized. You're now kind of creating a fiat layer on top of it. And what we're effectively seeing in places like El Salvador is the way people are using Bitcoin is in a way similar to something like a Venmo, right? They're not using the Bitcoin network to transact. They're using apps that are on top of it, third-party apps where they're not holding their own keys. The transactions aren't going through the decentralized network. It's basically going through a third party that's a custodian that's holding their coins and allowing them to transact. And what do those custodians have? They have the ledger, their own ledger, that they now have access to and control, right? And so you've just kind of magically gotten rid of the essence of Bitcoin. So yeah, I do see that happening. Maybe that becomes essentially the the money of El Salvador, or where's the CBDC of El Salvador. And I think there's good and bad, but ultimately I think it's pushing us in the wrong direction in terms of how we want the world to adopt crypto. It's not just about getting everybody to use this new thing called crypto. It's about getting them to use a true crypto that actually can't be co-opted or controlled by governments or corporations.
And it comes down to education as well. Like, just so many people are just unaware of basically what money is anyway. Like, just from right off the bat, many people don't even know what money even is. They just think that this note or I guess like just a digital number in your bank is money, and they don't really question anything about it. And I think the education stuff needs to happen if it's going to be mass adopted to the right way, which is difficult because you got, I mean, whilst the pandemic was going on, I before that I was kind of like, I thought everyone wanted freedom, but actually the majority want to be slaves. So it's kind of like that was a complete screw up in my head because I was like, wow, like people actually don't think like that. So that was a big tipping point for me. Like, I think it's to kind of create groups of people who want that and to be able to use Monero. And I think the privacy aspect is excellent. And I think that I use it myself. I use it to pay people P2P with your own wallet, such as Cake Wallet, without using stuff like Coinbase and other centralized exchanges. I think this is a good solution, and actually using it instead of just holding on to it and just seeing if it's an investment opportunity. It's more of a tool, more than an investment. You have to kind of see the utility rather than let me just put like trade my fiat for this and hope it goes up in value. I don't think that will really even matter in the next couple of years if the dollar hyperinflates to basically nothing, and then you've got trillions of dollars worth of Monero, but you can't really exchange it for dollars at that point. So it's more of a utility aspect, in my opinion, and it's getting used to using it more than just holding it in a like cold storage wallet or something. But yeah, I wanted to throw a couple of curveball questions here because as we go down that rabbit hole a little bit more and we see some more issues that could, these are questions you have to ask. Obviously, in regards to Monero itself, how private is it? Because, we're saying it's privacy by default. Are there any I mean, could there potentially be any backdoors? Could there be any issues with the chain itself?
Yeah, I mean, so that concern applies to all crypto,
For
right?
sure, yeah.
Uh, it's this concern that there might be an issue with the code. There might be an issue with the basically the cryptography underlying the code, the math underlying the code. And there might be an issue with the implementation of the code. So I remember with Bitcoin, that was kind of like when I first got into it, that was the thing that I was most concerned of, right? I was concerned of a 51% attack, right? Like what happens if this happens? And then like we approached it. I mean, we even like and like nothing nothing happened, right? It didn't break. And then I was concerned, like, well, how do we know it can't be? How do we know it can't be double spent? How do we know somebody really smart hasn't figured out how to break the encryption, and they could break a private key and get the crypto out of it. And so at the end of the day, there is trust involved, right? You're trusting those that are a lot smarter than we are in terms of cryptography and mathematics, that they know what they're doing and that they've all checked each other's work and that they've implemented it correctly. And so Monero gives me peace because it's a truly open source project like Bitcoin, and it's globally adopted, and it has a lot of passionate, very intelligent people that are working on it. Not because they're getting a paycheck, but because they want to build this global utility. And so I'm trusting that the system is working and that people are correctly checking each other's work, implementing it, and it's getting tested over time. And it's the same exact trust that you put into Bitcoin, right? You're trusting that the tech is right and is implemented correctly. And the reason why people trust it is because it has been tested over time. There's a huge honeypot sitting there for anybody that can figure out how to break this thing. And if they could do it, they'll do it. And there's a ton of money essentially that's being invested for purposes of research into how to break Bitcoin. The same could be said for Monero. It's a large enough project and it's been around long enough where I feel comfortable trusting the math, the encryption, and the implementation of the code. Yeah, because I saw, I don't know, you might be referring to, there was tweets going out the other day about Fluffy Pony, how he worked with agents to help them trace Monero.
Yeah, and I
Maybe
think
he did, right?
yeah,
Maybe he
because
did, right?
there
Like,
was an
but
interest there was an
the point
interesting
is,
yeah, go on. Sorry.
you shouldn't be concerned about that, right? Like, Fluffy Pony is just some guy who really liked Monero, and he really helped it in the early days. He was he was part of the project in terms of helping to develop it and maintain the code. But the idea isn't those who work on it then have an advantage over the rest of us and they can just press some button and hack into it. If that's the case, then all of crypto, that wouldn't just be a flaw in Monero. That means you'd have to worry about Satoshi. Maybe Satoshi then programmed it in a way that he could just steal everybody's money, right? But we're not worried about that because everybody's now looked at all of Satoshi's work and said, no, it's cool. There's no back door. So it's not like Fluffy would have some keys into Monero that nobody has access to. He's looking at all the same code everybody else is. Does he understand it better than 99.999% of society? 100%. Is it potentially if you were looking to trace it, would it make sense to go consult somebody like him? Yeah, absolutely. But then does that make it a flawed thing where he has this like secret key that he can give people to break into it? No, because that's just not how crypto works. And so yeah, that's why it doesn't keep me up at night. I mean, Monero is constantly evolving. It's not a static uh, piece of code. It does evolve and it improves over time. And so there are concerns that as it evolves, issues can happen, but it's the same concept. Monero takes its time with evolving. It's not like, hey, let's make this quick change. It's not move fast and break things philosophy. It's we change, we evolve because we have to, because privacy is a constant battle. Crypto is a constant battle. If you want to make sure it doesn't get co-opted by any government or state, we need to tweak things here and there to fix the flaws, to make sure it does stay ASIC resistant, to make sure it stays truly decentralized, to make sure it essentially stays private. But as we make those changes, we discuss them among everybody who's working on the project. We weigh the pros and the cons. We go and get all the code audited. We slowly put it out onto another testnet crypto where we watch it and see it out in the wild, see how it's working, and then eventually we add it into the code. So as long as you trust in that process in crypto in general, then you should have no greater fear of Monero versus any others. The ones you should fear are these fly by night cryptos that come out with some newfangled thing. They're like, oh yeah, you think Monero's private? We're even more private. And and then you go look who's developing it, and it's like one dude or two people, and they did a pre-mine and they own 80% of all the coins. But yeah, they have some amazing tech that makes it more private. Those are the things you need to be worried about. They're not they're at the end of the day, they're not truly open source, and they're not being vetted by a large community that's watching the code.
Yeah, regards to like the privacy space, obviously Monero is like the gold standard, and I think they're, from what I can tell right now, like I think it's the best option in regards to privacy and a solution for how the cypherpunks actually claimed, where we have megalomaniacs in this world who want to control stuff. So basically, we see it as transparency for the large organizations such as government, or if you don't believe in government, just corporations or anything large scale, and then privacy for the individual. And I think that's what Monero kind of is built on that kind of premise, basically. And hopefully it continues. I don't want to see any things coming out. I mean, I did see an article where the CIA or FBI are like paying anyone who can hack the blockchain of some kind, like $250,000 reward or something, which is interesting.
Yeah, well, once again, that's the same thing, right? So, like, if you could hack Monero, there's a huge honeypot. There's a huge, thing of gold at the end of the rainbow if you can figure out how to hack it. the U.S. government saying we'll give you $1 million if you can figure out that. Once again, that's a great R&D for Monero, right? They're basically donating to the Monero project, saying we want to donate funding to help you guys figure out
Yeah, to make it
if
more
these
resistant.
things, right? Like that's the only way it's going to get tested out in the wild. So, like to be concerned for me that's a positive, right? When we see those that stand to lose the most get concerned about it and actively try to work against it, that means it's working. And that if it does succeed, it's going to do what we hope, which is take away power from those that hold all the power. They're threatened by it. And so, yeah, no, I see that as a positive sign. And, maybe they do make some progress on that end, right? But like I said, these things they're not set in stone, and it is a constant battle. And I think fundamentally, those that are building this code do have an advantage over those that are trying to break it, because that's the way encryption works. And we have a head start. We already built this thing. It already works. So it's like we're already moving, and they could attack. They could try to figure out things. And then by the time they do, it's already evolved from there. And that's kind of how these things are playing out. And you have other cryptos doing interesting things. You have like, Zcash, right? Zcash, very interesting, very interesting project. They've developed some revolutionary tech, but it's the same thing. Monero is a little hesitant to overnight take their newfangled tech, zero knowledge proofs that they basically are using to conceal amounts, senders and receivers, and to just throw that into Monero. It's all right. Let's understand this better. It uses math that's a little bit more complicated. We're not saying it's a no go. We're not saying it's flawed, but let's make sure we completely understand this. Let's make sure there is no back door into this type of stuff. Let's do it the right way. And Monero will eventually, if it sees that there's new tech that's doing something that Monero is already doing but doing it better, it will adopt it. Same with Bitcoin to a degree. It's at least what they say, but I'd say that's maybe its fourth issue, is that it really has stagnated. Um, just because of the nature of the beast, it got really big really fast, and we have people who stand to make a lot of money or lose a lot of money based on the direction it goes, and because of that, it can't really pivot and evolve too much. It's for them to add, for example, privacy on the protocol layer, not going to happen. It's
Yeah.
just there's just already too it's just too political at this point.
Yeah.
Governments are basically okay with Bitcoin, and they're okay
Yeah.
with it because
Yeah.
it's fundamentally traceable. So if they wanted to go change that, there's going to be pushback. And really what holds it back more than anything else is its number go up mean, this idea that it's going to keep going up in price. And so the design decisions that are made in Bitcoin are really geared towards how do we make the price go up more.
Yeah.
And doing something like implementing privacy on the protocol level, at the end of the day, why people are like, oh, well, that sounds good to me. It's not good. It's probably not good for Bitcoin's price, right? Because
Yeah.
now you have the powers that be that maybe don't want to be a part of it anymore. You have large investment funds that are like, well, how are we going to handle this? We got all these regulations. We can't like start throwing all our money into this thing if governments are going to potentially try to shut this thing down. We like perfectly traceable Bitcoin that they're open to using. So that Monero has kind of made a pledge to itself and the community that it's okay. It doesn't see it as a negative evolving, whereas Bitcoin's has kind of sold that as a feature, like, oh, we're ossifying, and that's a good thing. And arguably, maybe there are some benefits to that, but if you want a completely incorruptible protocol, you're going to need to evolve to beat them at their own game.
Hey guys, just wanted to let you know about the upcoming event you don't want to miss, Monerotopia 23, the People's Money event happening May 6th and 7th in Mexico City. Join Monero developers, privacy tech project contributors, cypherpunks, and free speech advocates for talks and workshops, including Monero 101 for beginners and advanced workshops for contributors. Plus, there will be an Adoption Alley section showcasing projects and companies that already currently accept Monero. Tickets are very affordable, starting at $99 for all 3 days, with a special $25 ticket for locals. Use promo code Renegade to get 10% off at monerotopia.com. Yeah, and going back to Zcash as well, it's I believe only it's not private by default. You have to choose whether you want to shield your transaction, and I believe it's like I don't even know the numbers, but it's probably the last time I saw it was like 10% of transactions on the blockchain were private. So basically, it just becomes a lot easier to trace at that point when like most of your transactions are unshielded and traceable.
Exactly.
It becomes more less of a pool to be able to trace. So that's why privacy by default is one of those aspects that's important, which Monero adopted. Um, I'm going to play because we're all about freedom and removing tyranny and potential like technocracies and whatever's going on now, and giving the best tools for that kind of time. I'm going to play devil's advocate here because as much as I love Monero and I love crypto in general because it solves many solutions in regards to the current system of fiat, there's one thing in regards to like what we're seeing in regards to the internet itself, in regards to digital IDs. So we can potentially see, we're not saying it's going to happen, it may not happen, but you could potentially see a future where you would need a digital identification system to enter the internet itself.
Mm-hmm.
So the government and the people who run this put an umbrella over the space in a sense to monitor people and actually will have all their information to even access the internet itself. How at that point does Monero become a tool? As much as I want it to be, as much as I want it to be, perfect, but if that happens, is there something in place where Monero can still be something that is a usable tool for freedom if you need a digital ID to even access the internet, which at that point is kind of a social credit score kind of system already.
Yeah, I mean
That's a
that's a pretty wild
dystopian. That's a dystopian
hypothetical.
future right there.
Yeah, it is. I just don't think the world really ends up working out like that because I mean the government effectively invented Tor, right? It was the Navy, but Tor exists, right? And what does Tor do? It allows people to access the internet anonymously. And why did they create that? Because they needed it, right? They needed a way to have a large enough anonymity set of users, people using it, so they could communicate anonymously and and access the internet anonymously. So the government at the end, like that's probably my biggest response to that is at the end of the day they need a way for people to permissionlessly access and use the internet so they could do their dirty work too. So I don't really see that going away anytime soon. And then, as long as I have access to a power source, and I have a CPU, it's going to be really hard to prevent people from creating essentially their own internets, right? You have technologies like mesh networks. Like, yeah, sure, you could get into cahoots with the internet service providers and make it difficult for people to access the internet that way. But people will find a way through tech, just like they've done with crypto, right? That's like really what they've created. They've kind of are building a new internet, right? It's a new backbone to the internet. It's a more decentralized version of the internet itself. And that's once again why Monero excites me, because Monero is arguably even more permissionless than Bitcoin is, right? You can mine it with the CPU. You can only essentially mine it with the CPU. So anybody with the CPU anywhere, whether you're in Africa with your Android phone or you have a computer and you're sitting in Virginia, and you can equally access the network and you can start to participate in it and you can compete. You don't need an ASIC. You don't have a great advantage over anybody else. And that starts to build this egalitarian network of people that are participating in this new quote unquote internet. And then, sure, the first application is money and sending money in an untraceable way. But then there's other things perhaps that will be built on top of these truly decentralized pipes. And yeah, sure, governments can make it difficult. They control the ISPs, but like I said, I don't think they'll have the ability to stop people from figuring out how to communicate otherwise. As long as they have access to CPUs and electricity, they'll be able to connect their computers.
Yeah, I mean,
But
this is
maybe I'm
a. I mean, no, I mean, I think the free market seems to always have some sort of solution popping out. I mean,
yeah,
it's
and
never
it's
that
just
easy. Although the tech's improved and on the government side of things, like, and they can access that to control people. I just think that there's also an equal and opposite force of people doing the complete opposite and helping the free market be able to maneuver around that. And it's always kind of happened in history. I know we're coming to a more technological environment, which can have its negatives, but I do feel that there's always ways around these systems. And I think,
yes.
yeah, that's where you're coming from, I guess, as well.
And part of that is communicating to people like we're doing right now to make everybody vigilant, right? The only way this ID system works and CBDCs work is if, like with COVID, all these fools just opt into it, right? And don't question it, and
Yeah.
they just comply. So it's important to be really vigilant, hold your ground, and get others to hold their ground too, and show them examples. Look what happened with COVID. Look, you listened to the government. You're on your fourth booster shot. You're still getting COVID. How'd that work out for you? They're trying to do the same thing now with other stuff. So just be a little vigilant. I'm not saying you're an idiot because you just listen to big daddy government without questioning anything, but maybe next time you want to be a little bit more aware, and get people aware. And that's what we're doing, because at the end of the day, that's really the only way they win. There's a lot more of us than them, than those that actually are pulling the strings, that do control us, that stand to benefit the most, is a small group, and they need everybody to go along. And as soon as people don't, that's when the masses win. But unfortunately, it's quite easy to corral the masses, as we've seen with COVID. So I think bigger, even more than the tech itself is changing people's mentality towards all this and letting them understand that the choice is within them, if they want tyranny or they want liberty. The only way we bring about liberty is everybody collectively opting into it and deciding they want it.
Yeah, I mean, and also just, I think individually, just not thinking that these people are all powerful. They're really not, and you actually have the power to be free in your own life. I mean, I kind of realized that over the last couple of years as well. I mean, it's like empower yourself, and I think that these are not like just all knowing, all powerful, like I said, people who are running everything and are going to have their way, 100%. And just know that you have choices, and you don't have to do anything that they tell you to do. Um, yeah, I guess that Monero in itself, as we see cashless societies going forward, I think Monero could be the digital cash as a solution. Is where I see it. I'm sure that's where you see it, and that's where Monero itself sees it, as that sort of digital cash, where it's what, and it can't be printed to infinity either, so it can't be hyperinflated either. So let's go on to Monerotopia. It's the event that you guys are doing out in Mexico. Just discuss what it is, what's going to happen there, yeah, and just go on to that.
Yeah, and to just go off your last point, I mean, the biggest thing Monero has going for it is the biggest thing Bitcoin has going for it, which is network effect, right? So people are opting into using it for this use case. If you go in the dark markets and you want to buy something, most of the vendors would rather you pay with Monero,
Yeah.
or they're
Yeah.
requesting Monero, right? And so it has network effect for true digital cash purposes. When people actually have a need, most people don't realize or aren't coming across this need yet. They aren't realizing that it would make more sense to use untraceable currency. But for those that have that immediate need, I want to go buy something that may be considered illegal in my government, I'd be an idiot not to use the untraceable version. So it has the network effect, and that's what will likely propel it into the future as being the form of digital cash that we'll
Yeah,
use.
and it's a true use case. It's not like Doge or something. Like Monero has a true use case of privacy. It's
Right. You're
not
not going to
just
go on
some
the dark
random
market
shit
and
coin.
be like, should I use Doge? Should I use Litecoin?
Yeah,
Like, no, you're going to use Monero, or maybe some like you might consider another privacy coin, but you'll be like, wait, but they're all accepting Monero, right? And so that network effect gives it more power, makes it a more powerful tool universally as more people use it, and it also just grows, like you said earlier, the anonymity set. If there's just one dude using Pirate Chain on the dark market, probably not too smart to use that. You're become pinpointed, right? So the network effect is a real thing. Um, Monerotopia is a festival of freedom loving cypherpunks that are into digital cash. At least that's what we aim for it to be. So we did the first one in Miami last year alongside the Bitcoin conference. It was nothing like the Bitcoin conference, which is, I think, why people really took a liking to it. It was down the block from it. And what we discovered is most people that went to Monerotopia didn't even go to the Bitcoin conference. The reason we did it there because we thought, oh, we'd pull some people in from Bitcoin. It was like, no, people came in for the Monero conference. So we're like, all right, why are we even here? Like, we don't need to be hanging out in the shadow of Bitcoin in Miami, where it costs $400 for a hotel room. So
yeah,
we moved it to Mexico City, which is, I think, very accessible globally. There's a lot of people in the Monero community. Whatever, they live in Germany, they live in other parts of the world. They don't even want to necessarily fly into the U.S. for ideological reasons, or they're from countries where they might need a visa to get in, and they don't want to do that. So we put it in Mexico City, made it very accessible. It's very cheap once you get down there, and it's going to be a marathon of Monero. So it's actually, last year was one day. This year it's 2 full days, and reality is kind of 2.5 days. So we're starting on a Friday evening. That's when we have our welcome party, and now we're going to be doing talks on that day because we have so many speakers we couldn't fit them in. So actually the talks start Friday on Cinco de Mayo, May 5th, and then from early morning Saturday to evening, it's going to be like a full day of Monero. And we're going to have like the devs that are actually building this stuff, those that aren't anonymous, but some of the big names. We have we have Luke Parker, we have Justin Ernhofer, we have like I said, Peter Todd might, he's not a Monero dev, but he might go. We have a very long list of very well respected Monero devs. That's mostly going to be the first day. Then we're going to have talks just on like general concepts of liberty, digital cash, building out a parallel economy. Like you said, it's not just about investing in Monero and building a perfect tech, but it's about actually using it. So a big portion of the conference is devoted to this concept of using it. We're actually going to have a marketplace built into the conference, local Mexican vendors that we're working with that will all be onboarded to Monero. So the 3 days that you're there, you'll be able to buy your tacos with Monero, your tequila with Monero, the presents you want to bring home to your family with Monero. We're going to have a pretty large marketplace that will be built into the conference. The conference is, it's at an outdoor venue at a community center that's run by artists and activists. So it's a very cool vibe, and that's how we got access to all these vendors, and they'll all be accepting Monero. And then we're going to have talks on actively like how to build out a Monero parallel economy. How do we actually do it? What do we need to do? And highlighting the projects that are already achieving that, like Monero Marketplace, for example, which is a place you go to buy or sell things with Monero. And then the last day, we're going to have a bunch of other privacy tech projects presenting. Some of them are privacy coins, like and some of them are just privacy tech, like Nim. Nim is I don't know if you're familiar with Nim, but they're building it's kind of like a new version of Tor, so a way to access the internet anonymously. So that last day, we're going to highlight other privacy tech projects, let them present, let them share their solutions, and because that's kind of our way of not being maxi, right? We don't want this to be a BTC maxi fest where everybody else is an idiot unless they're using Bitcoin. No, we realize these are science projects. Let's talk about these things. Let's talk about the positive features of each project. So we have all these other privacy tech projects that will be participating. Let me just pull them up for a second. So we have Xano. Interesting about Xano is the guy who the main dev for Xano was actually the person who first implemented CryptoNote. So Monero is built on the CryptoNote protocol, not the Bitcoin protocol. It's its own unique protocol that was invented in 2014 in response to Bitcoin to make a more private version of Bitcoin. And so the guy who created the first implementation of the CryptoNote protocol is now building Xano. He'll be there. We have DarkFi, that's Amir Taki. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Yeah, I've
He's
heard of
quite.
his work. Yeah,
He'll be there. We have Oxen, Session, Firo. So we have a bunch. So it's gonna be very cool. And that's the conference in the nutshell. I mean, tickets are super cheap. It's like $100 for all 3 days. We had a VIP ticket, but we had to cap that. We sold out on that, and now we're adding a virtual ticket. So people, if they want, they can buy a virtual conference ticket and watch it live from home and participate in Q&A. Actually, we could create a your name of your podcast is it's Renegade, right? Renegade
Renegade
Lifestyle.
Lifestyle. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So what we can do is if you enter in Renegade, we'll give you 20% off on your ticket. We prefer that you buy a ticket to actually come down there because we want people to be down there in
Yeah,
person. So that's why we kind of waited on adding, but we added the virtual tickets. At the end of the day, there's a lot of people that can't jump on a plane and come down to Mexico City. So you could buy the virtual ticket. It's the same price as the general admission ticket. If you type in Renegade, you'll get 20% off. You can participate live and all in the entire conference.
we'll have all the links to that in the description. Just a quick question: is it growing? How's it going compared to last year? I mean, you said you're doing more days, so I guess
Yeah,
something's happening.
yeah, definitely. I mean, we kind of overbooked in terms of speakers and stuff. It's definitely growing. We have a ton of projects, and last year was just one day, and it
Yeah,
was a marathon. And yeah, this year we like, oh, let's add more days, so we space it out. Meanwhile, it's just as jam packed, but now it's 3 days instead of one. So yeah, I'd certainly say it's growing for sure.
that's great because I can only see it growing more as more issues come up in the traditional transparent blockchain space with government intervention and potential censorship on that side. I just see more and more people in the space itself move towards the privacy coin space and inevitably Monero first. So yeah, I think that's great, and I'm sure it will be growing year on year, which is great to see. Nice one. Yeah, thanks, Doug, again for joining here today. It's been a pleasure to have you on. Hopefully, we can do this more in the future as well. We'll have all the links again in the description for Monerotopia. Check out our website, renegadelifestyle.net. Don't remember to subscribe and share this episode as well if you feel like anyone that you know might find some value in this. Peace and love to everyone who's listening. Thanks again for joining. Thanks, Doug.
Cheers, man. Thank
Cheers.
you.
Bye.